Okay, top of the hour, so I'm going to get going. You are hopefully here for skills modernization for the virtual infrastructure admin. My name is Patrick Kremer. I've worked for VMware since 2014 as a pre-sales engineer, but I've been working with VMware products since 2006, the 3.0 days. I'm primarily a sysadmin. I have some very limited programming background from way back when I started in the industry. And today I work as a cloud solution architect selling VMware Cloud on AWS. So we're going to talk about why modernize your skills. So in a word, obsolescence. I believe that having no development skills at all is soon going to be equal to having no virtualization skills today. How many of you out there have installed Windows 95 from floppy? I know I have. And how many of you have imaged server disks with Ghost? I can't tell you how much of my life was spent staring at that Ghost screen. But we don't do that anymore, for the most part, because we have virtualization and we clone VMs from templates. And we install from an ISO and we have a master image and it's faster and easier and better. And yet even that method of building a server is now becoming outmoded. It's starting down the path of obsolescence. We need to modernize our skills. A little bit about how I started in the industry way back when. I didn't go to school to be a developer. My degree is actually in usability. Way back, 1999, the beginning of my career, I did a little bit of work putting like front ends, little forms, front end forms on access databases. There wasn't a whole lot to it, right? It's not really a developer job per se. But since 2006, my entire job has been system administration. That was all I did. All VMs, all the time, 3-tier apps. And just before that, before virtualization came along, I was working with physicals. And again, working with VMs it's pretty much the same job, except you don't have to image physical servers. You don't have to image VMs the way that you image physical servers. You don't ghost them anymore. You work with templates. But it was pretty much the same job. And everything related to programming were little snippets of PowerShell. So I dug into my PowerCLI folder when I was making this talk, and I found that I'd amassed like 440 scripts over the years, just little bits of PowerCLI code that I found. Google, right? Hey, I need to do something automatically. I find a script. I steal a few lines of code. I change it to point to my environment. And that's it. And that was really programming for me as a sysadmin, finding some PowerShell something that did what I wanted and maybe changing it a little bit. 2013 rolls along and VMware releases NSX. And just like when we went from physical to virtual, it's the same networking. It really is the same networking that you always knew. It's still VLANs and subnets. It's just a little bit of a different way to do it. And now we're in 2020 and we have these words like Github and microservices and Kubernetes, and VMware's including Kubernetes and vSphere now, and you have all these developer words. And what makes it really hard for people who come from a background of system administration, like I do, is it's a whole new profession. It's not just learning to do something a different way. It's a whole different job. So I don't know if anybody has seen this, the cloud native landscape. So this is just a portion of the cloud native landscape, just a chunk of what's out there in this Kubernetes cloud native world. And if you zoom out, it looks like this. And you look at this and it's completely overwhelming. You're an infrastructure person and you're like, where am I going to start? I can't start anywhere. There's nothing that I can do with this. You're totally overwhelmed. So where do you start? Well, you start with PowerPoint freezing. Super. There we go. So I'm terrible at learning things just to learn them. I need a project. So what I started with was VEBA. It stands for the VMware Event Broker Appliance. It's an open source project. It uses Kubernetes, the new developed app using Kubernetes, which I knew nothing about. I knew not one thing about Kubernetes when I started down this path, but I'm learning it in the context of something that I know really well, which is Virtual Center. So if you look at how Virtual Center works today, anytime something happens, you have an HA event or a data store gets full, an event fires off, and you have the same 3 alarm actions that you've had since the beginning of time. You can send an email, You can send an SNMP trap, or you can run a command on the virtual center. And in the product line that I sell, VMware Cloud on AWS, you don't even have these three options. You're locked out of that area of vCenter because it's a managed service. So a little bit about how VEBA works. So VEBA essentially monitors the event log. It monitors all of the events that are running, that fire on a virtual center, and it allows you to react to them programmatically. So some of the functions that are right out of the box of VEBA, maintenance mode alarms, first function. I love this one. How many of you go to patch your infrastructure and you pop a host in the maintenance mode and you patch it and you reboot it, and what do? You get an alarm and an email saying the host is down. Well, of course the host is down. I know, I rebooted it because I patched it. And you get pretty tired of all of that noise when you patch hundreds or thousands of servers. It's just noise. So this little VEBA function disables alarm actions anytime you put a host into maintenance mode. When you pop a host out of maintenance mode, it re-enables the alarm actions. So it cuts down on all your spam. Just a very simple example of a function that you can deploy. The second function, this is actually contributed by a customer. This one over here on the right, HA event notification. When you have an HA event, a host goes down and the virtual machines get rebooted. And this function, VEBA, will intercept the event and fire off an email, and it will list out all the VMs that were restarted and when they were restarted. So you have a nice list of what could possibly be broken from a crashed reboot. And the last little command, I like this command, this vsish command. This is just a little nugget that you can use to force a purple screen of death. So you can force your host to core dump and reboot. That's how I generated the screenshot for this. There's other functions right out of the box with VEBA. Maybe you need to tag a VM based on an event, powered on or powered off or vMotioned. Or maybe you have a sensitive VM and you want to be alerted anytime anybody touches it. So you can send Slack messages to a Slack channel that say, hey, such and such person reconfigured this VM and this is what they did at this particular time. There's PagerDuty built-in functionality to create a PagerDuty ticket when a particular event fires. So you can do all this just cool stuff that's not possible out of vCenter today. And so how I got into this is I had a customer in VMC on AWS and they wanted to do some notifications and I couldn't do it. And I reached out to product management and he said, hey, this VEBA open source project, this Fling from VMware, maybe it could help. So I took a look and I'm like, okay, it's just an OVA. I can deploy an OVA. So I did that. It was pretty easy to deploy. And then I started reading the README. And the first thing it says is clone the repo. I'm like, what's a repo? I don't know what that is. And then step 2, I know now that YML is a YAML file, but I didn't know at the time. So I'm like, what's a .yml? And I'd heard of JSON, right? I knew that it was like a configuration file, but I never worked with it. So I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do? So I open up this YAML file and I go, okay, it's just a configuration file. This isn't too confusing, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna SSH to this appliance that I deployed and I'll look around and maybe I'll see some familiar processes. No, not so much. I see all this containerd stuff and this cube stuff. And I'm like, where's my Apache? Where's my Nginx? Where's my SQL? Where's anything that I'm familiar with? And so I sent back to product management and I'm like, yeah, VEBA is a developer's tool, right? I can't use this. And the very next day, William Lamb replied, who I'm sure you know him from all of his extensive community contributions. And he replied with, nah, VEBA is actually targeted at virtual infrastructure admins. I'm like, okay. And we were right up near reInvent 2019 at that point, and William suggested that we meet, and he was going to show me the error of my ways. So we met out at reInvent for an hour, and I'm putting this timeline on here for a specific reason. So I went back and looked. We met on Thursday, December 5th, and he convinced me, okay, you know what? This really is a virtual infrastructure admin tool. Give it a try. So I decided, okay, I'm going to give it a try. Again, we were out at reInvent, and that was on a Thursday. So I didn't get back until Friday, I really didn't start looking at all this stuff until December 8th, not seriously. So keep December 8th in mind for a little bit later in the presentation. So as I like to do, I decided I'm going to deploy it, I'm going to learn it, and one of the best ways I know to learn something is to write about it. Learn it and then teach it. So I said, I'm going to blog this entire thing. I'm going to blog it all. And I've blogged every step that I've taken to gain the skill that I've gained this far. patrickkremer.com/VEBA. So I blogged how I deployed it. I screenshotted every configuration, every single thing that I put in a box in that first post, I blogged about. And then I started learning terms that I really wasn't familiar with. I've heard of GitHub, and I'd heard that like Git is, source control, but I don't really know what that means because I don't do it, right? That's not a thing that I do in my job. And so I learned Git is just an open source version control system, and GitHub is a cloud service that's built around Git. It's a place where developers can work on the same project simultaneously. And GitHub currently hosts over 100 million Git repositories, which is really just projects. A repository is a project. So here's a couple of the projects that I have contributed code to. The VMware Event Broker on the bottom, VMC onboarding, it's some documentation for my team. So I started getting into this, and you want to talk about some imposter syndrome starting out. I'm in this open source project, and there's 7 like hardcore developers, and then there's me, right? And this is a feature of GitHub that shows how many contributions, how much code you have contributed to open source over the last year. So look at some of these: 374, 242, 413 contributions, right? There's me, nothing. This is July of 19 through the beginning of December of 19. I've contributed nothing. So I'm coming into this like, what use am I? How can I actually ever contribute anything or be useful in this project? And what I've since learned about open source is that people want to help. Every single one of these people on this list have helped me. They want to, and they've helped other people. They've helped customer and public Slack channels. They've helped me internally. They all want this fling to be successful. And in just a really short period of time, I learned very important things, right? Containers run code, pods are grouped into containers, and pods are organized into namespaces. And just teaching me this one command right here, kubectl get pods -a, all of a sudden, all of that mess of random processes is in an organized way. And I can see, okay, there's functions running and there's VMware stuff running, and it starts to make a lot of sense. And then they taught me, hey, pods have logs. And this command, kubectl logs command, it is exactly the same as tailing a log file. So if you've ever done that on Linux, it's literally the same thing. So now I've discovered, okay, 2 commands, I can see what's running, and I can read the logs to figure out what's happening with them. And just a little tiny bit of knowledge suddenly, my system administration knowledge of 20 years suddenly means something again. So I want you to think back to that date, right? So I mentioned December 8th. I didn't start even looking at this and deploying it seriously December 8th. Well, if you look at the date here, December 10th, that's my first open source change. And all I changed was 1 letter. I changed read debuggy to read debug. This is in a piece of documentation, but I found a mistake. It was just 1 character, and I fixed it. And I did something called a commit. So I sent it over in GitHub for the owners of this project to look at, make sure that it's okay. And then it gets merged into the code base. So, I went from 2 days to knowing literally nothing about this stuff to being able to make an open source change. Eric in chat says, nice commit, that's awesome, 1 character. I know, I love it, just 1 character. So I can forever say my first commit was literally the least amount of work that anyone could possibly do, 1 character. I've got that going for me forever. So then I moved on, and this time I fixed 7 typos, in several different files, a couple different problems that I found with the documentation, and I blogged about it. Everything that I did, I blogged about to sort of reinforce it. And I'm telling you right now, I refer back to my own blog pretty much every time I go back to do this, because again, this is not what I'm doing full time. I'm a pre-sales architect full time. I just kind of do this in the background and on the side. So the blog post grew, and then I wrote about what to install on your laptop to be able to get code out of GitHub. And then I wrote about how to actually get the code, and then how to deploy a function inside VEBA, and then how to change source code in VEBA. And it was just little iterations over time. And this is just some of the stuff that you can see in the blog. Like I literally screenshot everything that I put in every configuration. I screenshot the output, what it's supposed to look like, errors that you might get. And you should recognize this command, kubectl git pods -a. I use it all the time. I've documented that. I've documented a bunch of git commands, right? I've learned it. I asked questions in Slack, and I documented this is how you make change to an open source repository. This is how you do it. And my commits, so the number of the code that you push, it grew, right? I did 1, then I did 2, and now there's 11 or 12. I don't remember how many. This screenshot says 11. And my GitHub contribution graph suddenly looks, hey, respectable. This guy actually does some stuff in open source. And going down this path has led to additional sort of career growth opportunities. I just recently had my first contribution in an internal repository. So lots of companies run internal repositories for projects that aren't meant to be public. And so I was able to publish, push get a pull request and commit code into an internal repository. And this I just thought was really cool. This happened last month. So there's this GitHub archive project where they decided that they are preserving code for future generations. So my VEBA code, everything that I've contributed, is now sitting in a vault 250 meters under the permafrost in a mountain somewhere. I just thought that was pretty slick. There's a mystery, sort of a mystery behind cloud native apps, and it seems like this unknowable thing that's too confusing. So I really want to highlight one of these bug fixes that I made. So this is a config file, and the bug report was that if there was a space and a hyphen in a cluster name, so like if the cluster was named CL space hyphen dash, dash 2, this PowerShell function bombed out and it threw an error. And the issue was that the way to escape a space and a hyphen in PowerShell is to enclose it in double quotes, right? Otherwise, PowerShell interprets the hyphen as a command line argument. So that's why it was breaking. And so this GitHub output shows you what I actually changed. That xargs line was already in there. That's what the original developer wrote. So what did I do? I changed some of the switches in xargs. That's all I did. Now, I learned xargs like 20 years ago when I was first tinkering around with Linux, right? And that xargs command really is at least 40 years old, at least 40 years old. This is the earliest reference that I could find from Unix System 3 in 1980. So your system administration knowledge and the knowledge that you have around Linux and commands and that kind of stuff, it's applicable in this cloud native world. So what I'm proposing to you is that you actually know more than you think. It's not as bad as you think. That's what I've learned as I've gotten into this. Your existing skills can be put to good use, just like this bug fix that I was able to do. Again, it's just fixing a Linux command. This other change that I did, so if you decide, hey, I'm gonna check out VEBA, I wanna deploy it. If you go deploy it, you'll actually see in the deployment option a change that I made, right? With a little bit of help, I was taught a little bit about how to do it, but it's my code and my change. So this SSH checkbox, I was deploying a lot of VEBA, and I got tired of consoling to the box, enabling SSH just so that I could SSH to it. So I wanted to be able to check a box on deployment. And so look at this code, right? You should recognize if you've done Linux at all, the top part, it's just bash. It's just a shell script. If a flag is turned on, run 2 system control commands. If the flag is off, run 2 other system control commands. It's just bash, right? The second line in green, this enable SSH variable, you know, do I really know exactly what each line of code does, AWK and the TR? Not really. What did I do? I stole it. I copied it from somewhere else in the file. I didn't figure all that stuff out. And then the bottom part is just XML. And again, I didn't write it. I just copied it and changed a couple of the names. I changed it to enable SSH. So it's not as hard as you might think. A lot of it makes a lot more sense, and your existing skill can help you learn this stuff. And like I couldn't have imagined that I ever could have made a change to like an OVF installer ever when I started this in 2019, December of 19. But it's absolutely possible. I'm living proof, I'm telling you. So hopefully I've inspired you to figure out maybe how to make your own checkbox. I'd love it if you wanted to check out VEBA. Here's all the links, right? So the VEBA docs site, how to download VEBA in your own environment. I've got my blog, patrickkremer.com/VEBA, everything that I've learned, how I got it running in my lab, and all the functions and stuff that I've deployed. It's all out there. And if not, I strongly recommend that you go find an open source project that matters to you and start learning it. It's a great way to learn, and it really has changed my career trajectory for the better. That is all I have, and I am happy to take questions. If any. Q&A. Will your slide deck be made available in any format? Sure. Yes, I can make it, I can put it up on my site. I don't know if we can actually, well, you know who I am, Eric, so you can find me. Yeah, I will put it up on my site. So if anybody wants to, let me reshare the links. Yeah, I'll make a PDF out of this deck and drop it. Where can we find the recording for this later? Maybe my moderator can answer that.
That's a good question. I don't actually know where we're putting this stuff up. Julia, I know that we put all of the videos on YouTube, VMware Code. YouTube.com/VMware Code is normally where we put all the sessions. I believe we're putting the live streams on GitHub. Yeah, that's the answer. We will upload, each of the presenters has a section on GitHub. I think it's their first name because we didn't have too many replications on first name. So you can go to the GitHub Code Connect 2020 page, and the recordings will be along with the slides checked into the GitHub project.
All right, and I will check it in. We were supposed to check it in. I just realized on that on the site.
We have
so
a few
I will
more
also
questions.
drop it. I will also drop it out there. Let's see. All right, I got. Let's see. That one's done. Done. Keith says he's been meaning to look at VEBA. Very cool. Is VEBA looking for more contributors, people wanting to join, and how do you decide? So Nick's asking if we're looking for more contributors. So absolutely. Absolutely. There's really, it's an open source project, so there's really never enough, right? There's never enough people. There's always something to do. There's no shortage. Where is that coming from? There's never a shortage, never too many people who can actually contribute. If you can't contribute code, you can contribute documentation. If you can't contribute documentation, you can
I have 2 questions on the chat as well.
go out and get help get other people interested. I'll say, have you found yourself diving into learning code like Python or PowerShell now that you're involved in contributing to the community? Absolutely, yeah. So I know PowerShell. I'm not a PowerShell developer. I know enough to get by, and but seeing how some of the Python scripts work in this VEBA, Yeah, I do. I actually started a Python course, talked with my manager about it, and he's supportive. Because again, in this cloud native world, Python skills are really important. Python's everywhere. So yes, I absolutely have started learning Python. Let's see, what other questions? Finbar says, looking forward to checking out my blog, something I've been looking to get into for quite a while. Learn how to contribute, absolutely. Which Python course? So there's a few that I'm starting off with an intro course on LinkedIn Learning. We have this thing called Take One at VMware, where they will pay for like formal courses. And I took a look at those, and I'm sort of in the middle of like some of these formal courses. Like I don't need an intro course to programming. I understand like what a loop is and what a variable is and that kind of stuff. But I don't get some of the Python specific stuff. So I was stuck in like this no man's land between total novice and intermediate. So I'm trying to use a LinkedIn Learning course to fill that gap before I go for an intermediate course. So that's what I'm doing right now. Okay, done. Caleb, I'm new to VMware infrastructure. I got my VCP DCV in August. What are some resources you recommend, and what was the most useful thing? So the most useful, there's a bunch of different functions. I feel like there's a bunch of different cool functions. I think in terms of what I've contributed, the most useful thing, the biggest thing that everyone's going to be able to use is that checkbox, right? It's in the installer, so it's an option that everybody gets to use. In terms of functions, I've altered some of the code and some of the Power CLI functions to make them a little bit better. So I've liked that. VCP DCV. So resources that I would recommend to. So I think, Caleb, I'll have you sort of clarify your question. Resources to learn more about vSphere, or resources to dig more into VEBA? So go ahead and type a new question there so I can get that answered. Finbar, how many programming scripting languages did you touch on in the VEBA as languages outside of PowerShell? Yeah, so I knew PowerShell. I mean, again, I'm not really a PowerShell developer, but from just years of running Power CLI, those are the languages that I gravitated to initially. So pretty much everything that I touched was PowerShell. I have recently, I've been reading the Python scripts. I've not gone so far as to change them in VEBA, but starting to look at Python actually led me to being able to contribute some Python code in a different repo. So there's a VMware Cloud and AWS Python module. So it basically turns API calls into easy commands. And again, I wouldn't say that I know Python. I basically, again, found a function in that Python file, copied it, and changed a couple things to have it do what I wanted it to do. So I dabbled a little bit in Python as a result of starting to learn this. And then just yesterday, or the day before, all the days run together, I forget, but I just wrote a blog October 1st on Golang. So I cannot write in Go at all, but I was at least able to deploy a Go function that Frankie Gold, one of our developers, contributed. So yeah, I am branching out a little bit and learning. I guess resources and how VEBA can use with vSphere and automation. So yeah, absolutely. So if you want to read about use cases, right, the VEBA doc site, VMware Event Broker IO is great. Pretty good documentation there. And then if you want to give it a try, I recommend the blog. It's specifically written for a VI admin who knows nothing about development, because that's literally what I was. When I started this off, right? I didn't know Git, I didn't know source control, I didn't know any of it. You're welcome. All right, I'll let it go another minute here. Well, actually, 1:30. We're just at time, so I can go a little longer. Yeah.
That was a great session. Thank you very much for this. I really enjoyed it. One of the cooler ones. I love it.
Thank you.
I was laughing when I put that question in chat. I meant to send it to everybody, not just you, right? But it's like, that's awesome when we get started and you do like a one. I've done that, like one character.
One character.
One character. I feel like I learned the process, and you contributed, right? You fixed something. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's I'm continuing my record of like the smallest possible thing. I have the smallest possible commit ever, and I'm also the shortest tenured VMUG leader in history. I was a leader for like an hour because I accepted a VMware offer the day I became a Chicago VMUG leader.
That can happen. That can happen for sure. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot. And everybody in the chat. Yep. Thanks a lot for being here. There is this survey that Julia put in the chat. Can copy it one more time if you want to give some feedback. I'm sure we'll all appreciate it. We aggregate this stuff up. I don't know if I can send to everyone again. Here we go. Hit enter. There is the form. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. All right. See y'all.
See you guys. All right. We're going to end it and go check out the rest of the sessions. 3 tracks going all day. Thanks for being here.